everything starts from education. Education is a weapon to eliminate discrimination, poverty, and support the person really to feel as a member, full member of the society.
When education is truly inclusive, every child feels empowered to learn, regardless of their background, ability, or circumstances. Inclusive education plays a foundational role in building inclusive societies. But inclusion cannot happen on its own. It requires inclusive leaders who shape attitudes and behavior by creating a school environment that values diversity and respect.
Noi reușim să încadrăm elevul în societate. Când zic elevul, mă refer la fiecare elev. La fiecare elev care are altă culoare, care are altă religie, care are necesități speciale și care urmează a învăța unul de la altul ce poate fi mai frumos. Omenirea poate să...
Across Central and Eastern Europe, many schools are making progress in fostering inclusive education. But new inclusion challenges keep rising. Issues like language, ethnicity, and political tension make inclusive education more complicated. Across the region, many students speak a different language at home, which makes it difficult for them to fully integrate at school.
I try to raise awareness to make all the teachers, all the employees aware of the fact that we are all different, but we all have equal opportunities.
School leaders can create welcoming environments by encouraging collaboration among teachers, support staff, students, and parents, implementing inclusive policies, adapting teaching methods to address diverse learning needs, and having the right resources and strategies to address these needs.
Դպրոցի աջակցությունը այնպիսին է, նախ դպրոցի իր դռները բացեց մեր առաջ, որ մենք լիարժեք զգանք մեզ որպես աշակերտ դպրոցում։ Ոչ մի խտրականություններ մենք չունեինք։
School leaders need training on inclusion challenges and the autonomy to allocate resources. Inclusion must also be a key focus when recruiting school leaders.
Ma näen, et kaasamine töötab. Ta töötab siis, kui kaasamine on sisuline, kõik osapooled teevad koostööd ja tagatud on spetsialisti teenus.
By empowering those at the heart of our schools, our leaders, we can create a future where every student feels they belong.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's event, where we will explore a critical and timely topic, leadership in education and its role to foster inclusion. My name is Petra van Haren. I'm the director of the European School Head Association, and I'm one of the lead partners of the European network, the Educational Leaderships Network Europe. And we will be moderating the webinar, which is part of the the European Education Month, which is actually initiated by this network, and we also call it the ELNE network. And I welcome you, today's participants, but also the future visitors of this webinar, because this webinar will be recorded, and it's not only for today's participants, but also for the people who will watch it in the future. This discussion today, it will build on the theme of the 2024 Global Education Monitoring Report, the GEM report, which will be highlighting the importance of educational leadership in creating equitable, inclusive environments for learners. The regional edition we are discussing today is developed in partnership between the GEM report and the Network of Educational Policy Centers, NEPC, and across Central and Eastern Europe, the Caucasus and Central Asia, the schools have made commendable efforts to foster inclusive teaching and learning environments. Yet, societal perspective can sometimes clash with the inclusive values. It creates challenges for schools in fostering an environment where every child feels safe and valued, and the same goes, of course, for teachers themselves. This tension can lead to a feeling of isolation or exclusion, or unfortunately, it can also raise circumstances where bullying and discrimination are at stake. However, School leaders who actively promote inclusive practices play a pivotal role in countering these issues. By championing the diversity and the belonging, the school leads can create a positive and welcoming atmosphere for children of all backgrounds, whether they speak a different language, have recently immigrated, belong to a minority group, or live with a disability. And the same goes for the teachers and all the people in and around the school. Since the European School Head Association supports school heads and contributes to their interests, responsibilities, and professional development, this report contains important issues that can give even more direction in fostering leadership towards inclusion. We as ASHA value this greatly, and we are proud that we are collaborating together with NAPC and UNESCO on this. Over the next about 70 minutes, we will explore the critical role of leadership in building inclusive school communities and ensure that every child feels that they are belonging. We thank you again for joining us in this important conversation, and mind that if you would like to join the conversation, you can use either the app or the questioning and answering button, which is below on your screen. Don't mind to interfere. I will read your remarks and I will take them into the conversation. We invite those online to use the reports, and also, of course, the future webinar watching people, to use the hashtag #LeadForLearning and to join the discussion also later on by reacting and findings and respondings on anything that you hear today or while reading the report. You can also ask any question you want later on after the webinar to the people involved today. To set the scene for our discussion, I'm delighted to present to you the people that we have with us today from the GEM report, the Chief Thematic Lead, Anna Dadio, and Lana Jurko, the Executive Director of the Network of Educational Policy Centers, NEPC. And they will take us through some of the findings and recommendations of the new Regional Educational Report on Leadership for Inclusion. So Anna and Lana, you have the floor.
Thank you, Petra. I'm just sharing the screen, so let me know if you can see it. Okay, great. So thanks a lot. I'm delighted to be with you today and with the audience that will follow this webinar today or in the future. As the report is a shared outcome with the Network of Education Policy Center, and we have here Lana that has really steered the process from her side. I'm delighted also to share the presentation with her. So at some point, I will pass the baton to her. So, and delighted to be here also for the European Education Month webinar that's really talking about leadership and the leadership for inclusion, which is a very important topic, as we all know. So I will start by just introducing briefly the work, and by saying that this is really a report we published end of February, and it's I would say, a natural continuation of what we have done in the Global Education Monitoring Report that we launched in October 2024. The global report was titled Lead for Learning, and it was about leadership in education, of course, and it took really a very broad stance on leadership, on educational leadership, because it didn't look just at school leadership, so leadership within the schools, but also leadership at the system level and also political leadership. But the regional report is something more specific and is something more appropriate, I would say, for the region, and is a continuation to the work we have done also in 2021 with Lana and the Network of Education Policy Center. As we published an inclusion and education regional report that focus on specific aspects of inclusion as a continuation in that case for the Inclusion and Education Global Report. And at the time, the report was a joint product between the General Report, the Global Education Monitoring Report, and the European Agency for Special Needs and Inclusive Education and the Network of Education Policy Centered. Now, the regional report is that we are presenting today is, I would say, a coherent continuation and in addition to the work we have done, because as Lana will tell in a few seconds, will guide us on a particular issue that are very important for the region, that is inclusion. And the report is based on 8 country case studies, and I would like really to thank the authors of the country case studies that have been based on surveys, interviews, and focus groups with key informants, including head teachers, and they have really enriched the report. The country case studies are about Albania, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Estonia, Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, Republic of Moldova, Poland, and Slovenia. And there is also one technical paper. Now, the addition of, since the focus of these case studies were these 8 countries, we have also used the work that we do since the Global Education Monitoring Report 2020 on inclusion, the peer profiles. The profiles enhancing education reviews, which in this case have focused on school leadership and have accompanied the global report. And with this, we have use this additional information coming from the 27 countries collected from the JAMA report peer website, that is education-profile.org, and we have used also these statistics, these figures in the report. On this, I will pass the baton to Lana.
Thank you very much, Anna. It was a pleasure, of course, to be part of this effort again from the Network of Education Policy Centers. I'm also very pleased as a member of the ELNE network to participate in the European Education Month. So thank you everybody for joining us. What I will do in the next few minutes is give you a little bit of a context of what the region is actually facing, and tell you some of the good things and some of the challenges that we are still at. So in the last 35 years, the educational systems in Central and Eastern Europe, the Caucasus and Central Asia have made great efforts to prevent discrimination in admissions and teaching, and have made significant strides in addressing the challenges, especially for students with disabilities. And one of the striking examples comes from Moldova, which has reduced the share of students with disabilities in special schools from 77% in 2005-2006 to just 5% in 2003 and 2004-24 school year. This marks commendable achievement, and it showcases what focused efforts and commitment can achieve. Yet despite these advancements, social and political tensions continue to challenge efforts to promote true inclusion. We must recognize and consider these barriers, for example, for those students who do not speak the language of instruction at home, whether because they belong to a minority ethnic group or have recently immigrated. And in the region, at 15 years old, there is 8% on average. In Estonia, the situation is even more pronounced, with 1 in 3 students facing this challenge, while at the same time, Estonian policy is regressing on these. Our schools must adapt to celebrate and embrace linguistic diversity rather than view it as a hindrance. Ethnic disparities remain another area of concern in the region. This is especially pronounced among the Roma population. Roma children have lower education outcomes across the region. In Albania, about 1 in 2 Roma children have dropped out of school. while in Bosnia and Herzegovina, only half of school-age Roma children attend the first grade of primary education. Migration and displacement also play a pivotal role in shaping the dynamics of our classrooms. And for instance, in 2024, 25% of Polish classrooms had at least one Ukrainian migrant or refugee student. To move towards truly inclusive schools, and Anna can change the slide, perfect. To move towards truly inclusive schools, inclusive leadership is must and should be prioritized. School leaders play a great role in advocating for inclusion. Inclusive leaders uphold strong values and high standards, champion diversity, equity, and respect. They lead by example, ensuring that inclusion is at the forefront of their mission. Their pedagogical and managerial expertise is essential, which enables them to turn their inclusive vision into reality, and they need to communicate it effectively to inspire others. Collaboration is another cornerstone of inclusive leadership. By fostering partnerships among teachers, support staff, parents, and communities, they recognize the shared responsibility of embracing inclusion within the school environment. Furthermore, adaptability and flexibility are key traits that empower these leaders to create safe and equitable spaces for diverse student populations. They prioritize the empowerment and development of their staff by providing training and support, while also trying to engage families as partners in the process. Inclusive leaders maintain a positive attitude towards inclusion, genuinely believing in the growth and development potential of all students. This combination of characteristics not only fosters a sense of belonging for children from diverse backgrounds, but also ensures that all learners, including those with disabilities, language barriers, or receive the support they need. Our data shows that motivated and committed school leaders can create supportive learning environments. Yet school leaders in the region have varying attitudes towards inclusion, from strong support for inclusive practices to skepticism about this practical implementation. The variation in attitude is often linked to the specific challenges and contexts faced by school leaders in different countries. In Albania, for example, 90% of school leaders agreed that inclusive schools enhance academic progress of all, and 96% supported curriculum adaptation for effective learning. In Estonia, 74% of school directors considered that inclusive education promotes independence, but only 47% of heads of studies in Estonia shared this view. Directors' leadership roles shape their attitudes, giving them a broader perspective. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, 68% of school leaders believed inclusion is more effective in theory than in practice. They expressed concern about insufficient teacher training, curriculum adjustment, and the effectiveness of inclusive practices. In Kyrgyzstan, only 41% of school leaders believe that inclusive education boosts students' self-esteem. So there is a polarized view on broad inclusion and mixed support for general classrooms. Regarding the knowledge and expertise of school leaders in the region, there is also a varied understanding of what inclusion is among school leaders. For instance, a significant number, 68% in Bosnia and Herzegovina and 60% in Estonia, believe that while the concept of inclusion is valuable, it is often more successful in theory than in practice. There's also a pressing need for better preparation of school leaders. Despite the demand for comprehensive training before assuming leadership roles, only 65% of countries offer pre-service training, and a mere 19% provide an induction program for new leaders. Regarding in-service training, while all countries do include inclusive education as part of professional development, the emphasis tends to lean towards administrative compliance instead of specific strategies for implementing inclusive practices. The findings related to professional standards highlight that 48% of surveyed countries have established specific leadership standards. However, only a few of those frameworks explicitly integrate inclusion as a core component. A review of principal preparation programs showed limited coverage of essential leadership dimensions. Out of 28 analyzed programs, only 21% addressed all four critical areas: setting expectations, emphasizing learning, fostering collaboration, and developing people. Lastly, the report stresses the necessity for school leaders to possess specialized knowledge and understanding of inclusion to effectively cater to diverse student needs. Identifying these challenges has shaped the recommendations presented in this report, and I will leave this to Anna to present to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lana. Thanks a lot. So I will move to the recommendation of the report, and which align very much with the recommendation of the global report, but take also into account specific feature of the region. First of all, when we think about leadership, we think about which decision, which roles they are taking. And so the idea is that we know, and the evidence showed that the school leaders that are trusted and empowered are those that are better carrying out their roles. So what does it mean in practice? This means that it's important to create the enable condition to foster inclusion, because leaders need the opportunity to take decisions, and the evidence and show that when they are trusted to use their skills, their influence is greater. However, in this context, when we talk about empowerment or trust of school leaders, another words that come very often in the scene is autonomy. Autonomy is very important. And of course, when there is empowerment, it means that there is some degrees of autonomy. However, autonomy is not sufficient when it is not adequately supported. And what does it mean? It means that autonomy should be supported by clear roles. So what is expected from school leaders to do? Is there any clear idea or framework? And as Lana was just saying, she was talking about the professional standards, for example. And in addition, to be possible, to be feasible, autonomy needs adequate, timely, predictable, and equitable resources. When you are asked to do something as a school leader and you have not the resources, either financial or human, you cannot do what you are expected to do. And so there is a lot also of insatisfaction or stress that goes when autonomy is not accompanied by this measure. And at the same time, it's not sufficient to talk about autonomy. Autonomy should be accompanied by accountability. Accountability for resource use is important. However, there should not be excesses also in this, because high-stake accountability can have also drawbacks. And the example that is reported here, but there are many more in the report, in Ljubljana municipality in Slovenia, school receive resources to support personal needs for inclusion. So they are autonomous in the choice of the type of support their staff needs to be able to do the inclusion, to carry out and foster inclusion. The second important point and the second recommendation is that it's not sufficient to talk about fostering inclusion. What are the conditions to make this inclusion, more inclusion possible in school leadership? So school leaders need to be recruited with inclusion in mind. What does this mean? This means that, as the global report said, investing in the professionalization of school principal is really key. And in the region, what we have seen with the country profiles, the peer country profiles and the country studies, is that differently from the global level, the majority of countries in the region apply open competitive recruitment in both primary and secondary education, which is not something that happens everywhere in the world, but only 36% of countries require management experience. So it's important to be a fully qualified teacher, but it's also important to have management experience. Being a teacher is important because you know what happens in the classroom, but being a teacher doesn't mean that you are a good manager, a good school leader. So At the same time, when we talk about precisely about inclusion, and we look how selection processes select candidates for the role of school leaders, we realize that we are very far from the ideal because only selected countries assess candidates' preparedness to focus on inclusion. For example, Georgia assesses attitudes of candidates towards inclusion, but not the knowledge, and this is not the same thing. And or otherwise, in some contexts, there may be the focus on particular type of inclusion. Which is not inclusion as the Global Education Monitor report means. All means all. The diversity and the inclusion is for all groups, is not a specific group. So for example, Moldova only assesses disability and special education needs knowledge, and Kyrgyzstan only looks at special schools principle. So there is a partial view, which is already good, but there is a partial view on the meaning and the implication of inclusion. And if we look at inclusion on the other side, so meaning looking at the representativeness of the school principals and the diversity and the role models that they can serve, we realize that diversity is not really the key word in that sense, because besides the fact that female principal are still a minority, and I should add on this that we are preparing the gender report on school leadership, on educational leadership, that will be published around the month of May. But there are also different types of diversity, and especially in the region that is very diverse in terms of ethnic origins. And we see here, looking at the country studies, but also at the peer profiles, that only Hungary, Romania, Serbia, and Slovakia have measures to promote diversity in principal positions. So this is another important point to keep in mind. And Lana has already talked about that, but it's very important to, when we talk about professionalization of school principal, we don't talk about just the selection, we talk about also the preparation. And the preparation is not one shot. It doesn't happen just when school principal arrive in the office. This is very late. The preparation to become a school leader is a continuous process that operates from the start, when one has the aspiration or the ambition to become a school principal. And in that sense, the report argues that professional standards, even if in some contexts they can be seen as controversial, are very important because they can give clear directions about what are the roles that school leaders are expected to carry out, and how and what are the knowledge and expertise that is expected from them. And we see that in the region, only 48% of countries have adopted standalone professional standards and competency frameworks. Moreover, what the report highlights is that pre-service training is not mandatory in some countries, for example, in Bosnia-Herzegovina and Estonia and Kyrgyzstan. And also induction training is not very usual. What we see is that what happens generally is that school leaders are trained in service, and with, of course, the barriers that they encounter in terms of cost, in terms of time, especially when they teach. And there are two examples here, Albania and Slovenia. Albania, there is a 9-month initial teacher education program that is aligned on the school standards and focus on instructional leadership. As you know, there are different types of instructional leadership, but educational leadership, school leadership, and instructional leadership is the one that really reflects the focus on learning, the development of teachers in particular, and the empowerment of staff, I would say. And inclusion is mandatory in this initial teacher education program, but it just covers special education needs issues. So again, we see a good aspect, but at the same time, a partial view of inclusion. In Slovenia, there is the 1 year headship license program. As you know, there are different types of ways school principal can be certified. So this is a very comprehensive program that has a compulsory module which addresses inclusion and emphasizes leadership in environments with different and diverse student populations. So you see a broader view of inclusion in this case. And the last, but really it's not the least, I would say, and we have had a discussion very recently in a webinar with moderated by Petra and other distinguished speakers about the shared leadership. And I think this really, and the report makes the case also on the importance of leadership that for inclusion that thrives on collaboration. So it's really critical to promote shared leadership and collaborative cultures. And the report, the regional report and the global report make really clear that we don't need another hero, as sharing allows to build better schools. In the discussion we had with Petra the other day, there was this idea of a shared leadership as a hydra was a clear concept, and the discussions at the end concluded that it may seem a hydra, so very complex and multifaceted, but it's really crucial. So, and why? Because assistant principal and teacher lead in the classroom, students can be active leaders among peers, and parents and community, when they are included in the process, contribute to school success. And when we look at what happens in reality, this is the theory. When we look at the reality, we see just that 46% of school leader professional standards in the region currently require school principal to promote teacher cooperation. So I'm concluding here, just highlighting some forthcoming edition on the leadership. So the Central and Eastern Europe, Caucasus, and Central Asia, Lead for Inclusion, was the first one, published end of February. The next one will be on Latin America, with a focus on some countries that you see here. The focus will be on distributed leadership specifically. So very interesting too, this report on distributed leadership. And then there will be in June another one on East Asia that will focus on educational leadership and digital transformation. At the same time, we will have a spotlight on Africa leadership in October 2025 on instructional leadership. And in the coming months, there will be also a youth report on youth participation in education policy making, an important kind of leadership, educational leadership, and the gender report on woman leadership role. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you so much, both Anna and Lana. And in a way, I feel a kind of hopeful, because it seems a complex thing, inclusion. But in a way, I also hear quite simple. Inclusive schools need inclusive school leaders. And to start with it, all you need is that you have inclusion in mind. So we don't need big theoretical frameworks, just keep it in mind and then promote and cultivate your collaboration. And of course, it requires trust, empowerment, and training. But in fact, the hopeful thing is we can all contribute by just first taking it in mind before taking any next steps. We know from Anna and Lana, they just told us that the success of these inclusive practices hangs on supportive context. And transfer theory to practice seems a kind of difficult. We know it, but we don't do it. And I think, therefore, we have a perfect moment to introduce two new speakers here. We have Amanda Watkins and Roger Slee. Amanda is the inclusive educational expert on the University of Leeds, and Roger works for the Center of Disability Studies, also committed to the University of Leeds. Thank you for joining us today. And you are both the authors, the co-authors of a paper on inclusive education in Poland. And we know that in Poland, this inclusive education has gradually been improving, but of course, there are still challenges to address. Therefore, I have actually two questions for both of you, and maybe you can tell us something based on these recent studies. My first question would be, what are the biggest challenges and opportunities for school leaders to foster inclusion in the Polish schools? And second, how can these policy makers, the decision makers in Poland, make further support for school leaders and schools to create this more inclusive learning environment for students with their diverse needs, including those with diverse disabilities or migrant backgrounds? Can you tell us something more about your research? We keep the time in mind. We're a little bit behind on schedule, so I will be strict at the end.
Thank you very much, Petra, and thank you very much to the team for the invitation for Roger and I to speak to you today. We're really pleased that we've got the chance to share some insights into the work that's been ongoing for a number of years in Poland, and the work that different people working in different leadership roles in Poland are doing to promote inclusive education. Roger and I will tackle the questions independently. So the first part of this joint input from us both, I'll look at your first question, if that's okay, Petra, and think about some of the challenges and opportunities, and then hand to Roger, and he will be thinking about some of the possibilities for support that could be given to leaders working at different levels from the policy level. So we thought we'd give just a little bit of background, if that's okay, on the case study that we completed on behalf of the GEM team. Our focus was not so much on trying to share facts and figures and a policy analysis of what's happening in Poland at the moment, but rather we wanted to share the voices of different people who either are in leadership roles in Poland or they are impacted by leaders in Poland. And so we took an ecosystem approach, and we spoke to policymakers working at the national level, regional levels, school levels. We also spoke to teachers and parents about what leadership for inclusive education means to different people in Poland. And so we really wanted to take a bit of a qualitative view. And so the information we're going to present now is a synthesis, a summary, a collection of the main messages which came from these different people during 5 online focus groups that we had during the autumn of 2024 with different people working at different levels on their views, these shared views about what does leadership that can promote inclusive education really mean. So a starting point for us, thanks Roger, was to ask different people, what characteristics do you feel leaders for inclusive education need? So what sort of attitudes and values and what sort of behaviours do inclusive education leaders model? And these are leaders working, as I say, at different levels. So not just the school level, but also regional level leaders. And in the Polish context, this is very, very important because leaders working at national level, regional levels in the different wlodships and the different municipalities have quite an influence over what may and may not happen in actual schools. And so these are a summary of messages that different leaders shared with us, which very much echo some of the findings from the main report. So leaders for inclusive education, leaders who are able to enact inclusion and really support the learning needs of students who've got different profiles, different types of needs and challenges for their learning. First of all, they must model inclusive values. So inclusive leaders are inclusive in the way they act and they operate. They've got to use and facilitate good communication, open communication, and very active collaboration with lots of different stakeholders, very importantly with families and parents, which is a point which has already been made. Inclusive leaders have got to form, maintain and motivate very diverse teams. But a point that was coming up again and again in all of the conversations we held was that primarily inclusive leaders lead learning first. They are pedagogical leaders first and they're administrators secondly. And another point that is not mentioned here, but sorry, Roger, you've jumped ahead for me there. But all of these points very much apply not just to leading and working inclusively with learners and their families, but also with the school team and the people who work around a school. So inclusive leaders are very inclusive in the way they work with support staff, with policymakers working at different levels. They're able to form teams which are broader than just the school community. So, no, thanks, Roger. But Poland is facing a number of different challenges, and in the paper that we were able to draft and shared via the GEM team on the website, you'll see that there is some background information on the context for Poland and how the policy that exists at the moment may be impacting on the work of inclusive leaders, because it's in effect quite limited in terms of flexibility that allows school leaders in particular to make decisions and to then make changes in their situation to meet the needs of their teams and their learners and the families that they're working with. There are quite a lot of rigid regulations, particularly around school recruitment, that were being reported from stakeholders across the discussions that we had. School leaders themselves highlighted the fact that very often they are facing competing expectations, different stakeholders asking them different things. And that balancing those competing expectations is sometimes a real challenge for them. Point that's already been made, there are limited opportunities for accessing training for staff that some school leaders feel impact on their own work. So it's difficult for school leaders themselves to access training for inclusive education, but it's also difficult for them to access the sorts of training that their teams need. Linked to that, many school leaders reported that there was a lack of qualified staff to support students with different needs. But something underpinning a lot of their work was the reported pressures of a very rigid curriculum, which is very focused on content and meeting content goals. And there are challenges that are associated with that for the whole school team. Thanks, Roger. But on the reverse side of the discussions, what we found in our talks with all of the team members that we spoke to was a real high degree of flexibility and creativity in the thinking about, well, how can we address some of these challenges and what might be some of the opportunities that really seem to support leaders for inclusive education in Poland. Priority number one, which seemed to come out, was that leaders across the system, as well as teachers and leaders of learning and parents, were saying that more and more all stakeholders working in the Polish system seem to recognise the importance of cooperation between themselves. And they saw this as a bit of a culture shift in the Polish education system. Across the system, there's a need to be thinking about how do we cooperate more, and how do we make the importance of cooperating with people at different levels in the system. How is that now integrated more into policies at the national level and at the local and regional levels? There was recognition that school directors need to be able to develop partnerships, and that they need to be working in a way which has been mentioned earlier, in a way that supports other people to take on leadership roles and responsibilities. So not just sharing leadership, but actually supporting their team members to take on those roles. And one very interesting discussion we had with a number of different people was the request for many Polish leaders, for national level policymakers, regional level policymakers, to provide possibilities for joint roles within schools, within different clusters of schools, so that there could be educational leaders and administrative leaders working cooperatively, but people who had different types of roles but work jointly to fulfil the needs of the schools. The idea of teachers as leaders is something which is not always widespread in Poland at the moment, but it is taking root. And as more teachers take on the responsibility to lead learning rather than just deliver the curriculum and assess against the curriculum, then this is felt as an opportunity for school leaders to make their schools more inclusive and to make sure that they are able to take opportunities and make use of different possibilities for autonomy and supporting decisions at the pedagogical level to make sure that learning needs are being met within their school communities. So Petra, those are some of the points that we'd like to highlight regarding the first question that we had for you. And now I'd like to pass to my colleague, Roger, who will tackle some issues from the second question.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Amanda. But I must tell you that you have only 3 or 4 minutes left now for Roger. So be aware.
Sorry about that. No problem. I'll work through as quickly as I can. And thank you again for the privilege of working on this project with you. So some of the key messages that we got. One of the messages was that there needs to be a recognition that it's not so much a case of introducing inclusive education in Poland, because it's already happening in a number of schools. The message also came out that we need to be careful about the assumptions that we make about the threshold knowledge of educators and school leaders. We can't assume that they already have those necessary skills and personal competencies or the degree of flexibility that the current situation demands of them. Also, there needs to be systematic change in the mindset around what a leader does and what the competencies leaders need to be effective. And the system level political mission and vision that school leaders have cannot be a product of the current education system. So we're looking for real clarity around the messaging and a change of messaging, so that, for example, it could be that the message is inclusive education is everybody's business, but it's not business as usual. In our literature review that we did to establish the case study of Poland, we found 4 domains that we wanted to look across and that needed to be supported for all leaders in the system to think and act more inclusively in these domains. The first was the cultural domain, the second was the skills, then knowledge, and the political domains. So again, what has frequently been found is that there needs to be a more coherent message around inclusive education. What is it that we mean by that? And this is a really important imperative in such rapidly changing times, the times that we live in, and context becomes extremely important in this regard. We saw the observation that there was a need for a shift away from a medical approach or a categorical approach, which is currently focused on labelling learners. We need clearer, more flexible funding models for inclusive education for local and school level leaders to be able to access. There needs to be a clearer linking of education and social policies, and this needs to be done more directly, more explicitly, and more effectively. In this area, we also need to ensure that pilot projects are evaluated transparently so that policy decisions can be made on the basis of evidence. Leadership for inclusive education should be the concern of all leaders in a system and be guided by a political commitment to developing inclusive leadership at all education system levels. So policy, we would argue, is made at all levels. Therefore, leadership should extend to all levels.
Sorry, Roger, I am going to stop you now because we have another wonderful guest, which is Anna Mlekuž. She is part of the Slovenian research team. She was the author of the Slovenian country case study. I want to come back to you, Roger, because you were not completely done, but I think also what Anna has to say is important. And then in the end, I hope that we have some time to talk about all the topics that were not addressed yet. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It is really a privilege to discuss this important topic with all of you, and thank you for all your previous presentations because they really align to what my presentation will be about. So Slovenia has in the past years taken significant steps towards inclusion with a strong legislative framework and committed educators. However, school leaders face substantial challenges in turning policies into practice. At the same time, there are great opportunities to enhance inclusive education if we strategically support school leaders. So today I will address 2 key points, one of them being the biggest challenges and opportunities for school leaders in fostering inclusion, and the other one being how policymakers can further support school leaders to create more inclusive schools. So I'll start with the challenges. So we somehow identified 5 main challenges. The first one being resource shortages. So one of the primary challenges is the lack of adequate resources. Schools face insufficient funding for special education teachers, language support for migrant students, and specialists such as speech therapists. Another significant issue is the shortage of teachers in general, including, of course, all listed above, and also compounded by the fact that many of them are leaving the profession. As a result, school leaders often struggle to provide the necessary support for students with special educational needs due to these constraints. The second challenge is limited autonomy for school leaders. While Slovenian school leaders have some autonomy, bureaucratic restrictions often limit their ability to allocate resources effectively. Greater flexibility in resource management would allow leaders to better respond to the diverse needs of their students. The next challenge is gaps in leadership training. Although Slovenia, this has already been mentioned, has a strong leadership training program, there is insufficient focus on inclusive leadership. Many school leaders feel unprepared to manage diversity, integrate migrant students, or support teachers in inclusive practices. So training programs should address these gaps to empower leaders with the necessary skills. The fourth challenge is parental engagement. So there are two different challenges within this challenge. So some parents, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds, often struggle to engage with their child's education. So school leaders frequently face difficulties in building strong relationships with these families, which can, of course, hinder efforts towards inclusivity. On the other hand, some parents tend to blame the school for their children's poor academic performance while being overly involved in their learning. So to address these issues, more structured and balanced parental engagement strategies are needed. And the last challenge is the lack of a cohesive national vision. So while Slovenia has inclusion policies in place, there is no unified national vision specifically guiding school leaders in this field. Without clear strategic direction and long-term planning, school leaders often work in isolation, trying to solve inclusion challenges on their own. However, despite these challenges, there are significant opportunities for progress. One of them being enhancing professional development. So by integrating inclusive leadership training into both pre-service and in-service programs, we can equip school leaders with practical tools to create truly inclusive learning environments. Then there is strengthening peer networks. Establishing formal mentorship and collaboration programs between school leaders facing similar challenges can foster knowledge sharing and practical solutions. Schools that have successfully integrated migrant students or special educational needs learners can serve as models for others. There is also an opportunity to expand cultural competency programs, meaning that schools that implement intercultural activities and structured language support for non-native speakers see improved student integration. So school leaders who champion such initiatives can make their institutions more welcoming to diverse student populations. And we could also leverage community engagement. So schools that build strong relationships with parents and local organizations and local community create a more supportive environment for inclusion. So school leaders should be giving the tools and resources to implement effective community outreach strategies. So based on these challenges and opportunities, many policy recommendations for supporting inclusive leadership can be determined. So for Slovenian policymakers, supporting school leaders in fostering inclusion requires concrete actions in the following areas. So firstly, redefining school leadership criteria. So inclusive leadership should be a formal requirement for school leaders' appointments, and evaluation criteria should assess candidates' ability to implement inclusion strategies and support diverse student populations. Then providing greater autonomy and resources. Policymakers should grant school leaders some more flexibility in resource allocation. Targeted funding should be increased for hiring support staff, providing language assistance, and reducing class sizes in diverse classrooms. It would be also necessary to develop a national strategy for inclusive leadership. Slovenia needs a long-term cohesive strategy that aligns national policies with school-level practices. Clear guidelines, goals, and expectations will help school leaders to implement effective inclusion programs. There should be also a need for investing in continuous professional development. So this should be expanded. The inclusive education training should be expanded within leadership development programs, and workshops, peer learning initiatives, and exchange programs should be offered to help school leaders continuously refine their skills in the field of inclusion. It is also important to promote knowledge sharing and best practices. So policymakers should support platforms where schools can share their successful inclusive education practices, which all these activities could include either national conferences, knowledge hubs, professional networks, and so on, all dedicated to inclusion. And of course, it is important also to strengthen parent-school collaboration. So schools need structured programs to engage parents from all backgrounds. Policymakers should fund initiatives that encourage parental involvement, particularly for migrant families and socioeconomically disadvantaged groups. So to conclude, we need to keep in mind that inclusion is not just a policy goal, but it is a fundamental principle that defines the quality of our education system. So by addressing the challenges that the school leaders face, we can create an educational environment where every child feels valued, supported, and empowered to succeed. And with the right support, the school leaders can become the driving force behind a more inclusive school. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. I would really like to invite participants, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat or in the Q&As. And be aware that both the report of Anna and also Roger and Amanda is to be found on the UNESCO website. I would like to go back to Roger, and apologies for the rude interruption, but it's really my task to make sure that everybody gets some speaking time. There are no questions so far, but could you elaborate a little bit more, Roger, on the points that you did already mention and maybe not yet mentioned, also in regards to the Slovenian and the general report?
Sure, thank you very much. I do appreciate that, and I appreciate the position that you're in as a chairperson. So thank you. I'd like to make three very quick points about leadership and what came out of both our literature review and the case study of Poland. The first is the importance of context, and it's important that leaders are encouraged to and are given the skills to read context and to be able to apply policy with that in mind. We also found that much more guidance and support needs to be given to leaders to become intellectual and educational leaders, that they ought to be public intellectuals. So here, given the nature of social change, in a fast-changing world, being able to read those conditions and trends and changes is critically important, and leaders in the past have not always been encouraged to do that. And finally, I'd like to just remind ourselves of the importance that we found, certainly in the Polish case study, of fostering leadership across all of the constituencies of education and ensuring the proper representation and authenticity of voice for all population cohorts within schools. That is an element of leadership. So thank you very much, Petra.
Yes. Well, I take out a few things which strike me in a way. The word context seems to be very important, but also the autonomy of school heads. Now, within ESHA, we work with a lot of school heads. And when we go a little bit deeper into the discussion, we find that in the end, school communities are quite similar because there are the school leaders, there are the teachers, the parents, the staff, the kids. And that, in fact, a lot comes down to an entrepreneurial attitude of school heads, that sometimes you feel you don't have the autonomy, while in fact, you may be able to create a kind of autonomy because the legislation is not so much against you, but it's also a feeling of freedom. We have some 10 minutes left, so I would like to do a little round that everybody can have a final reflection, maybe on my remarks, maybe on something else, and try to keep it on to 2 minutes. I would like to start with Anna and then go to Lana, to the other Anna, and in the end, Roger and Amanda one more time. So Anna Daddio, maybe you want to start with your final reflections.
Yeah, I thanks a lot, Petra, and thanks a lot also Anna, Roger, and Amanda for your very insightful comments. I mean, on autonomy, I think that there is a it's very complex, and I think the issue of context is even more important because, as we know very well, the context is not just in terms of um, uh, what you have in terms of financial or human resources, is also governance, is that the institutional arrangements that exist and may constrain or give you freedom. We know because I just take your point about what you just said. I think that principal who enjoy a high level of autonomy may be able to match, for example, in terms of teachers' development, professional development, may match what is needed to promote an inclusive environment. For example, but this is shaped by the institutional framework. For example, they have the school leaders have a high degree of autonomy in decision related to teacher professional development. They can assess teachers using models developed by the School Leaders Association, and then can adapt this model to the needs of the school. But this is not the same things everywhere. So I would say that what is really important when we talk about leadership, and in terms of what should be or is expected to be done. I think in this sense, the recommendation of the Global Education Monitoring Report and the regional report are really fundamental, because there is the issue of how to foster inclusion, and you foster inclusion by the legislative and the policy environment, but you foster inclusion also by the preparation and the acknowledgement of the work that school leaders and teachers do. And again,
Yes.
that's really very important. And acknowledging that, meaning also to talk beyond what we have discussed today, talking about their working condition, talking about how they implement the leadership, what is the support they have to do that. So it's very complex. And as we said the other day, I think it's really talking about leadership is not one word, it's multifaceted. And that's why context is very important. But one really needs to take into consideration the fact that it's fundamental to select, to develop, to recognize the work that school leaders do.
Thank you, Anna. Lana, your reflection.
Thank you so much. Maybe just 2 points, I think. One is on what I think Amanda said about the necessity of pedagogical leadership of our school leaders. And this, of course, is very much true. Unfortunately, in our region, a lot of the job that the head teachers do is administrative. And actually, they don't have time for pedagogical leadership, even if they had the knowledge, the values, and so on. So this is something that the policy needs to sort out. How Estonia, again, an example, they have an administrative leader and they have head of studies. Whether this is the best way to do it or if there needs to be more of the shared leadership among others in school is a question. But definitely they cannot be pedagogical leaders if they need to take care of the roof, the water supply, the employing of the teachers, the everyday things. So they are really overburdened with a lot of managerial or let's say administrative tasks, and they don't have time to be pedagogical leaders. So that's one thing. The other point I would like to make is about this idea that you mentioned, Petra, about the entrepreneurial leader. And on one hand, it kind of goes also about the personality of the leader. And I think that's one of the mistakes we always make, is that we think people are born as leaders, and that it's something that is not learned, that it's something that somebody has the charisma or doesn't have the charisma to be the leader. We can see that in our political, how we choose politicians and leaders in our political worlds. So this is something that I think is crucial not to make a mistake with school leaders, that we know that these things are skills and attitudes and things that can be learned and valued. We don't need heroes or we don't need charismatic leaders. We need a system that prepares school leaders to really lead schools towards our visions. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you to Lana. So actually you're saying to move away from managerial tasks to more leadership, in fact. Moving now to Anna Mlekuš. You are from Slovenia.
Yes, thank you. When thinking about what to say to conclude, actually, Lana has expressed what I wanted to express as well, that it is really difficult to focus on being a pedagogical leader if you are burdened with that much administrative tasks. And at the same time, because I was also doing the focus groups for the report, a principle that I talked to came into my mind when I asked him, what does he think that a good school leader should be? And he said, well, first of all, he needs to be a human. So he wanted to say that the leader needs to have like empathy. He needs to understand the teachers. He needs to understand the students, and then everything else is much easier. Also, how to lead a school and how to use the autonomy that he or she has in order to make the environment more inclusive. So for me, also this part is quite important. The personal characteristics of a leader, which of course can be taught and can be developed through the education, through the also in-service training and so on.
Thank you for this addition. I think it's very important. The last 2 minutes are for Roger and Amanda to conclude the webinar, and then I want to thank everybody who's here.
Okay, I'll kick off again then, Petra. And I think I'd like to highlight the issue that within the system, leaders for inclusive education maybe are not just working in schools, and that a lot of the points and the challenges and opportunities that are being raised today, we need to consider those for policymakers, leaders who are working at regional levels, but also national levels. Because if we're expecting inclusive education systems and support networks around people who work in schools to help them to be effective, it means we need to be thinking about the attitudes, the skills, the knowledge base of leaders who are working at other levels in the system. And maybe that's something which is a bit of an overlooked area, and the implications of leaders who work at different levels who don't understand what inclusion means and don't understand the goals of the policy and what that actually means in application. I think that needs to be something that needs a lot of digging into in a lot of different ways.
Absolutely. Roger, the last words are yours.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to go back to some of the observations from the Convention on the Rights of disabled people, the general comment for that they made when they came back to looking at education systems. And they were saying that a lot of systems have interpreted inclusion as a question simply of how do we move special education into regular education? And that's not the aim whatsoever. The aim really is how do we reconstruct the culture of schooling for new times? And I think that message applies right across the various domains of diversity in our schools. How do we create schools that are culturally connected to new times and difficult times?
Yes, thank you, Roger. This is really something very essential because times are moving very rapidly. And if we keep hanging in the past, we cannot move ahead, especially in this inclusion where things can go so fast and others can be left behind. It was my privilege to have you all and to be your moderator today. I want to thank Anna Dadillo from UNESCO, Anna Mlekuš, Roger and Amanda, who have been working on the regional reports. Last but not least, Lana Jurko from the Network of Educational Policy Centers. You were a guest in a webinar of the ELNA Webinar Week, the European Leaderships Network Europe. And I hope to see you again in the future. Have a very nice day. Thank you all so much.